Tonight, we dive into a world far removed from the fantasies of castles, knights, and courtly love. A world that smells worse, hurts more, and offers no mercy to modern expectations. Welcome to the Middle Ages, a time where just waking up alive doesn't guarantee you'll stay that way. So before we settle in, grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and take a moment to be grateful for soap plumbing and the miracle of antibiotics. Because once we step back in time to 1323, you'll quickly realize that you probably wouldn't last a single day. Let's begin. You open your eyes disoriented. Your body aches. Your nose wrinkles at the stench. You're lying on a mattress stuffed with rotting hay and straw crawling with fleas and lice. The bed you're on was a barn floor 3 months ago. There are no sheets, no pillows, just a stiff wool blanket soaked in last season's grime. It weighs as much as a small calf. As your senses wake up, so does the reality of where you are, a one-room wooden hut with no windows, no insulation, and no privacy. Your parents, your siblings, your livestock, and possibly a random cousin all share this open-concept living arrangement with you. The air is a symphony of odors, stale, sweat-spoiled beer goat dirt, and something suspiciously fungal. You want to stretch, but your muscles creak like an old wooden door. You're 22, which in medieval terms is middle-aged. You have the spine of a 70-year-old and the knees of a collapsed miner. As you rise, your bare feet meet the floor, which is either slick with rainwater from the leaking thatched roof or crusty with chicken droppings. Either way, it's a lose-lose situation. Outside, the church bells clang your only alarm clock. It's not so much a gentle nudge as it is a spiritual siren. Everyone's stirring. You, your 7 roommates, the fleas, the rats, and the lice colonies living in your hair. Privacy doesn't exist. Personal space doesn't exist. If you need time alone, try hiding behind the pig. But the day must go on, and nature calls. Loudly, you head outside, squatting behind the hut with a wooden bucket. There's no toilet, no flush, no toilet paper, just a full pail that your uncle, bless his digestive tract, filled to the brim with last night's turnip disaster. When you're done, you toss the contents directly into the street. That's right, the street. The open sewer shared by everyone. It's customary to yell "Gardez-vous," an old French warning meaning watch out below, though no one really moves in time. The entire town smells like a barnyard soaked in latrine juice. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, great, you now get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers on a communal bench. There's no privacy, no separation, and barely any ventilation. You may chat while you go, but don't breathe too deeply. Wiping, try straw moss, or if you're rich, a scrap of wool. Most people just use their hands. And yes, that's why medieval handshakes weren't a thing. And if you live in a castle, surely things are better. Not quite. Castles have garderobes, holes in the wall that drop waste straight into the moat. Problem is, invaders sometimes climb up those waste holes to get in. So even using the toilet could mean sudden death or an ambush from below. Toileting in medieval times is a public act, a survival challenge, and occasionally a tactical liability. Having survived the medieval restroom experience, you head inside for breakfast. Not that it's worth waking up for. Forget eggs Benedict. Forget lattes and toast. Breakfast is a wooden bowl of thick grey pottage stew made from whatever you can find. Barley turnips, beans possibly a bone or a weed. It's been simmering for days, sometimes weeks. New ingredients are simply dumped in, not cleaned. It's not so much cooking as it is edible composting. You might get a chunk of bread with it if bread means something harder than granite and bulked with sawdust or acorns to stretch the flour. Drinks. It's 6 a.m. and you're drinking beer. Yes, beer. Not because you're partying, but because the water is deadly. Filled with parasites and human waste, water could kill you faster than starvation. So you drink small beer low in alcohol, high in not dying. Even children drink it. Now that you're fed and watered, or at least not dead, it's time to get dressed. Your outfit singular. You own one set of clothes, a coarse wool tunic or a linen shift. You've worn it every day for years. It stinks. It's stiff. It's crawling with lice. Underwear optional. Laundry, a logistical nightmare. You haul water from the river, boil it over a fire, scrub your clothes with ashes or lye, and then dry them in the sun when the sun decides to exist. For most peasants, washing your clothes happens once a season. Maybe shoes. If you're lucky, you have a pair of untreated leather flats with zero support and holes in the sole. If not, you go barefoot, through mud, through dung, through the remnants of last week's gardy-loo. Your feet become a textured map of medieval terrain. And now your skin. You itch constantly. Everyone has fleas. Everyone has lice. Nobles, monks, children, priests. The lice don't discriminate. They live in your hair, your clothes, your bedding. If you develop a rash, tough luck. There's no cream, no doctor, no diagnosis. You just live with it, or die from it. Either way, there's no relief. Next comes your teeth, or what's left of them. There's no toothbrush, no paste, no floss. You might chew on a twig if you're lucky. Vinegar rinse maybe, but mostly a teeth rot. Cavities, cracked molars, gum disease. By age 25, your smile resembles a haunted crypt. And if you get a toothache, your only option is to yank it out with iron pliers by candlelight. Possibly performed by the same man who cuts your hair. Infection is likely. Antibiotics don't exist. Congratulations. You're now ready to start your day. Your jobs survive while working for someone else's wealth. If you're a peasant, and odds are you work the land for a noble who's never spoken your name. You till soil, dig trenches, plant seeds, weed crops, carry water, and pray your spine doesn't give out. You start at sunrise, you finish at sunset. You don't get days off. You get feast days, religious holidays where you go to mass instead of work. That's your break. Women don't just do housework, they work. The fields raise children, cook, clean, sew, and tend animals. Kids start working around age 5. There's no school, no toys, just labor. If you're not in agriculture, you're a tradesperson, blacksmith, cooper, tanner. Each job involves fire-sharp tools or animal guts and pays just enough to not starve. Break a bone. Too bad. Get a fever, drink warm beer, and hope for the best. If you can't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you die. That's the economy. Weather makes things worse. Winter, freezing wind blows through holes in your wall. No insulation, no heating, no wood, because gathering it from the wrong forest can get you executed. Your fire burns low, and your breath turns to frost. You wrap yourself in your one damp blanket and hope your fingers make it till spring. Summer, your home turns into a clay oven. No breeze, no fan, no deodorant. You sweat into your layers of wool and linen. Flies swarm, mosquitoes bite. You can't take off clothes that's scandalous. You just stew in your own filth, hoping you don't collapse from heat stroke. Want to cool off, splash some water on your face. Be careful. Water is dangerous. Rivers and wells are contaminated with waste corpses and runoff. People still drink it, but you smarter now stick with beer. Bathing is rare. People think it opens your pores to disease. Communal bathhouses exist, but are often shut down for becoming too communal. Washing requires hauling and boiling water, so most people just don't. Dirt becomes armor. Get sick. Good luck. Medicine is based on the 4 humors: blood phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too hot, bloodletting. Too cold, herbal laxatives. Most treatments involve leeches, vomit, or GOD. Surgeries happen without anesthesia. Wounds are cleaned with wine if you're lucky. If not, you just hope it heals. If it doesn't, fever, sepsis, death. Now let's talk about food. Dinner is pottage again. Maybe some hard bread. Maybe spoiled meat. Maybe turnips. A lot of turnips. You might have cheese full of bacteria, or butter already rancid. If you're rich, you get meat and spices. If you're not, you choose sadness and hope it fills you. Don't get caught poaching. Killing the king's deer could get you hanged. You finish your meal. You want to rest. But religion doesn't rest. You attend Mass. You confess. You fast. You tithe. You pray. You fear hell described in vivid burning detail by your local priest. The Bible is in Latin. Only clergy can read it. You rely on their interpretations. Miss a prayer, sin. Dream something indecent, sin. Eat meat on Friday, hell awaits. And if you're a woman, multiply the misery. You're expected to marry young, bear children, obey your husband, and suffer in silence. Childbirth is a death lottery. No painkillers, no clean tools, just prayer and blood. Complain, you're a nag. Show independence, you're a witch. That label gets you drowned or burned. Still breathing, not for long. Violence is everywhere. Crime is punished with spectacle. Theft, lose a hand. Lying tongue pierced. Gossip, iron muzzle. Accused of witchcraft trial by ordeal. You retrieve a stone from boiling water and hope your hand heals in 3 days. If it doesn't, execution. Or you're tossed in a river. Sink innocent, float guilty. Either way you die. Death is constant. From disease, from injury, from birth, from famine, from rats, from a neighbor's bad mood. If you make it past 40, you're a legend. Most die before 5. Your funeral, a shallow grave. No tombstone, no embalming, just dirt and a whisper. And yet people lived. They loved. They sang. They laughed. They endured. Despite everything, they found joy. They held hands, told stories, shared food, and hoped for a better day. So tonight, when you sink into your clean sheets, take a moment. Be grateful, not just for technology or comfort, but for the simple, extraordinary privilege of being alive now. Because medieval life, it wasn't simple. It wasn't romantic. It was survival. And yes, you probably wouldn't have lasted the day. Long before she was Catherine, the great empress of all Russia, enlightened monarch and reformer of an empire, she was just a teenage girl named Sophie. Born Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729. She came from a small German principality with little power and less influence. Her family had noble blood, but not much else. And yet this girl, clever, watchful, and fiercely determined, would go on to become one of the most formidable rulers in European history. Sophie's early life was shaped by contradiction. Her mother, Johanna, was cold, controlling, and obsessed with status. Her father, a Prussian officer, was emotionally distant. From a young age, Sophie learned how to navigate tight spaces, how to nod, observe, obey, and survive. She read voraciously, learned French, spoke German, and watched every room she entered. She was a sponge soaking up the social rules of power. At just 14, Sophie's life took a dramatic turn. Empress Elizabeth of Russia was looking for a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter. She didn't want a Russian noblewoman. She wanted a foreign girl, pliable, grateful, controllable. Sophie fit the mold: noble, well-educated, politically neutral, and most importantly, Lutheran. Elizabeth was Orthodox, and Sophie would have to convert. But that was part of the plan. So Sophie was summoned to Russia. She arrived in the icy capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, wrapped in thin German fabrics, and forced diplomacy. Her mother pushed her forward like a chess piece. But Sophie was already playing her own game. To survive and thrive at the Russian court, Sophie did what she'd always done, she observed. She listened, she learned. She converted to Russian Orthodoxy, changed her name to Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine, and shed her old life like a skin. The ceremony was public, symbolic, and irreversible. She wasn't just switching religions. She was burning bridges. She was becoming Russian. At court, she quickly realized that her future husband, Peter, was not what she had hoped for. Peter was awkward, immature, and cruel. He was obsessed with toy soldiers, idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia, and disdained Russian customs. Some accounts claim he refused to consummate the marriage for years. Others describe him as emotionally erratic and politically incompetent. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: Peter was not fit to rule, and Catherine knew it. She, on the other hand, embraced Russia like it was her destiny. She learned the language, adopted Orthodox rituals, studied the empire's history, and gained the loyalty of key courtiers. She was disciplined, poised, and intensely strategic. While Peter played with dolls and drank himself into oblivion, Catherine was quietly building a network. The Russian court was a dangerous place, paranoid, gossipy, and ruthless. Empress Elizabeth still reigned, but she was aging. Everyone knew a transition was coming, and everyone had an agenda. Catherine was watched constantly. Her letters were read. Her friendships were monitored. She couldn't trust her husband, her mother, or even her maid. But she was patient, calculating. She made friends with military officers, charmed intellectuals, and positioned herself as the opposite of Peter: stable, loyal, competent. She read Voltaire and Montesquieu, in secret filled her mind with Enlightenment ideas, and began imagining a different Russia. A modern Russia, a Russia ruled by her. When Empress Elizabeth died in 1762, Peter finally became Tsar. But his reign was doomed from the start. In just 6 months, Peter alienated the church, angered the nobility, and offended the army. He openly admired Prussia, Russia's enemy, and spoke of divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. He reversed popular policies, insulted national pride, and made it clear to everyone that he had no respect for Russia's traditions or its people. Catherine saw her chance. In July of 1762, while Peter vacationed at a country estate, Catherine made her move. Backed by powerful allies, including her lover Grigory Orlov and his influential brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia and was declared empress by the imperial guard. The army, clergy, and court rallied behind her. Peter, caught off guard and without support, surrendered. Days later, he was found dead. Officially a hemorrhoidal colic, unofficially assassination. Catherine was now the ruler of Russia, not by blood, not by marriage, but by coup. It was audacious, it was dangerous, and it worked. But taking the throne was only the beginning. Now she had to keep it. Catherine understood that power gained through manipulation could be lost just as quickly. She needed to transform her image from schemer to sovereign, from foreigner to national mother. And she did it with astonishing success. She launched ambitious reforms. She reorganized the legal code, established a legislative commission to draft new laws, and issued the nakaz, her political manifesto, inspired by Enlightenment ideals. In it, she denounced torture, promoted education, and proposed equality before the law. For 18th century Russia, it was revolutionary. She corresponded with Voltaire for over 15 years, bought Diderot's library to support him financially, and invited intellectuals to her court. She wasn't just reading Enlightenment thinkers, she was embodying their vision, or at least the version she could safely implement in an autocratic empire. Because make no mistake, Catherine was not a democratic ruler. She believed in reform, but she also believed in control. She expanded education, especially for girls. She built hospitals, funded art, and promoted inoculation against smallpox, publicly receiving the vaccine herself to set an example. But she also tightened her grip on power, reinforced the nobility's dominance, and crushed uprisings with brutal force. Her balancing act was masterful. Enlightenment on the surface, autocracy underneath. She moved Russia forward, but only as far as it would let her. One of her greatest challenges came in 1773 with the Pugachev Rebellion. A former soldier, Yemelyan Pugachev, claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's supposedly dead husband, and rallied peasants, Cossacks, and serfs with promises of land freedom and justice. His army grew rapidly, fueled by rage at the oppressive feudal system. Towns fell, fortresses surrendered, nobles were slaughtered. For a moment, it seemed the empire itself might collapse. Catherine responded with overwhelming force. The rebellion was crushed. Pugachev was captured, paraded in an iron cage, and publicly executed. In the aftermath, Catherine backed away from talk of serf liberation. The dream of reform gave way to the necessity of order. She leaned more heavily on the nobility, exchanging loyalty for the right to rule their serfs with impunity. The Enlightenment ideals were not abandoned, but they were revised. Catherine had learned that philosophy alone couldn't govern a country. Power had to be practical. But if she couldn't liberate her people, she would expand her empire. Under Catherine's reign, Russia's borders grew more than under any other ruler before her. She waged wars against the Ottoman Empire, claiming Crimea and access to the Black Sea, securing the warm water ports Russian rulers had long coveted. She participated in the partitions of Poland, erasing a nation from the map, while adding vast territories to Russia. She invited German settlers to colonize Russian farmland, established new cities, opened trade routes, and solidified Russia as a European power. Her generals like Suvorov and Potemkin became legends. Her military campaigns, though often ruthless, reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Europe. But Catherine didn't only expand with swords. She expanded with symbols. She founded the Hermitage Museum, collected masterpieces, supported opera and ballets, and turned her court into a cultural capital. She created a Russian Enlightenment, one adorned in velvet, gilded in gold, and scripted in French. And then there was her private life, perhaps the most scandalous part of her legacy. Catherine had lovers, not one or two, dozens. She selected them personally, rewarded them with titles and estates, and dismissed them when the relationship had run its course. Some, like Grigory Potemkin, were far more than romantic flings. He was her advisor, her military strategist, and perhaps, according to some historians, her secret husband. Europe gossiped. Pamphlets mocked her. Rumors swirled, some so grotesque they're not worth repeating. But beneath the scandal was a truth that frightened her critics. Catherine was a woman who owned her power. She refused to play the passive consort. She ruled. Her affairs were strategic as much as they were personal. She surrounded herself with men who were loyal, capable, and politically useful. When they ceased to be, she let them go with a pension and a handshake. Her love life was not a weakness. It was part of her system of governance. Catherine ruled for over 3 decades longer than any female leader in Russian history. When she died in 1796, Russia was larger, richer, more powerful, and more feared than it had been in centuries. She left behind a throne, secured an empire expanded, and a legend that would endure for generations. But her reign also left questions. Could she have done more for the serfs? Did she compromise too much for power? Was she a reformer or an autocrat? History calls her the Great. Not because she was perfect, not because she was kind, but because she was undeniable. She took power and wielded it with brilliance, audacity, and steel. She didn't just wear the crown. She redefined what it meant to deserve one. In the deep, humid jungles of southern Mexico, where the canopy filters sunlight into green-gold haze, lies the ruined city of Palenque. Here, stone temples rise from tangled roots like relics of another world. One temple, in particular modest and unassuming, would become the site of one of the most haunting archaeological discoveries in modern Mesoamerican history. A discovery cloaked in crimson dust, whispered through centuries of silence. Her name is unknown, her story unrecorded, yet her legacy is undeniable. They call her the Red Queen. In 1994, a team of Mexican archaeologists led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez was conducting surveys near the Temple of the Inscriptions, Palenque's most famous pyramid, and the resting place of the great Maya ruler Kinich Janab Pakal the Great. Beside it stood a smaller, less imposing structure, Temple the Third. It had been largely overlooked, thought to be architecturally minor. But something within its core hinted at more. While exploring a sealed-off chamber beneath Temple Third, the team broke through a stone wall and descended into darkness. What they found was not ruins, but reverence. A pristine crypt, untouched by looters, unspoiled by time. Inside the chamber lay a stone sarcophagus. When the lid was opened, a red mist rose into the air. Cinnabar mercury sulfide powder coated everything. The walls, the bones, the burial offerings. Even the air itself shimmered with a crimson haze. And at the center of it, all nestled in sacred silence, was the skeleton of a woman. She had been interred with exquisite care. Her skull rested on a jaguar pelt, her face covered with a jade mask composed of delicate green tiles, shaped to reflect the contours of her own visage. Around her body lay jade necklaces, ear spools, shell ornaments, diadems, obsidian blades, bone needles, and carved figurines. Ceremonial vessels, tools of ritual, and tokens of elite status surrounded her like sentinels. This was no ordinary woman. This was someone powerful. But who? The burial's opulence immediately drew comparisons to Pakal himself. His tomb, discovered in 1952 within the Temple of the Inscriptions, bore many of the same signs: cinnabar jade, elaborate preparation. The proximity of the two tombs, mere steps apart, only deepened the mystery. Some archaeologists theorized she was Pakal's wife, Queen Tsakbu Ajo, who bore him multiple sons and participated in public ceremonies as his consort. Others suggested she might have been his mother, Sakuk, who ruled Palenque as regent until Pakal came of age. Still others speculated that she may have been a high priestess, a royal matriarch, or a female ruler in her own right. DNA analysis has provided few answers. Initial studies failed to establish direct familial links to Pakal, but did not rule out a spousal connection. Without inscriptions or glyphs identifying her, the Red Queen remains nameless. Yet her tomb speaks volumes. In Maya culture, red was more than pigment. It was power. Cinnabar, a rare and toxic mineral, was used in funerary practices to symbolize blood rebirth and the sacred life force that bound humans to gods. Covering a corpse in cinnabar was not preservation, it was transformation. It was anointment with divinity. Few were ever buried this way. Fewer still in such proximity to a divine king. The Red Queen's tomb was constructed with intention. It lay deep within the temple's interior, accessible only through a steep, narrow staircase. The architecture mirrored the descent into Xibalba, the Maya underworld. Her sarcophagus was aligned east to west, tracing the path of the sun from dawn to dusk, from life to death. But unlike Pakal's tomb, hers bore no grand inscriptions, no mythological carvings, no cosmic scenes. The silence of the space was itself symbolic. It was not for the living to interpret, but for the dead to inhabit. Her jade mask was not a decoration. It was identity armor. In Maya belief, the soul traveled to the afterlife in stages, and the face was its most essential feature. A mask preserved that essence, protected it, made it legible to the gods. Her jewelry particularly, the jade represented breath-life fertility and the cycle of nature. Jade was sacred. It was worn by royalty and offered to the divine. In her tomb, it covered her, the presence of ritual tools. Obsidian blades, bone pins, carved figurines suggests her role went beyond ceremony. These items were used in auto-sacrifice healing rites and divine communication. Their inclusion in her tomb may have echoed her duties in life or prepared her to perform them in the afterlife. Ceramic vessels found near her skeleton may have once held cacao, maize pulque, or offerings of incense and food. These were not luxuries. They were provisions for the journey through Xibalba, where the soul would face trials and judgment. And then there is the most haunting element of all this silence. No name, no title, no inscription, just presence. Some have argued that this anonymity was intentional. In Maya, theology memory was not preserved through words alone. It lived in ritual, in color, in structure. The Red Queen was remembered through cinnabar, through burial proximity, through sacred geometry. Her absence from written history does not mean she lacked meaning. It means she transcended it. Still, scholars yearn to identify her. One of the strongest candidates remains Tsakbu Aja, also known as Lady Tsakbu Pakal's wife and queen. She was of noble lineage, born in Uxteker, and married into Palenque's royal family to cement political alliances. She bore at least 3 sons, one of whom succeeded Pakal as king and appeared frequently in ceremonial contexts. If any woman deserved such a tomb, it was her. Supporting this theory is the timeline. Her death, estimated by radiocarbon dating, aligns with the period shortly after Pakal's. The positioning of her tomb next to his suggests deliberate dynastic pairing. And there is the cinnabar. Only 2 burials in Palanque have been found with full cinnabar coverage, Pakal and the Red Queen. No others. That alone implies sacred partnership. Yet DNA results remain inconclusive. No maternal link to Pakal has been found. But since marriage is not a biological relationship, this doesn't rule her out. Some researchers still argue she may have been Sakuk Pakal's mother and regent. Others float the possibility that she was a priestess, elevated to near-divine status. In the absence of clarity, her identity becomes symbolic. She stands for every elite Maya woman whose name was erased but whose influence endured. For the matriarchs, advisors, healers, and rulers whose power was recorded in architecture, not ink. The Red Queen forces us to reconsider assumptions. Maya society was not uniformly patriarchal. Women held offices of power. They led rituals. They governed cities. Their bloodlines cemented dynasties. And when they died, the heavens marked their passage. Her tomb, though smaller than Pakal's, was no less sacred. Its austerity was its statement, a chamber of raw stone and red breath, a shrine of silence. In the end, the Red Queen may not be known by name, but her story is inscribed in cinnabar and jade, in stairways and sun paths, in the sacred hush of the jungle. She was not buried to be forgotten. She was buried to become legend. Frida Kahlo was not born to be ordinary. Even before she became an icon, before the flower crowns the bold brows, the museum walls, she was something else entirely. She was a fire disguised as a girl. She came into the world on July 6, 1907 in Coyoacán, then a quiet village on the outskirts of Mexico City, in a bright blue house that would one day become a shrine to her legacy. Her parents were a study in contrast. Guillermo Kahlo, her father, was a German-Hungarian immigrant, a photographer, and a man of quiet precision. Her mother, Matilde Calderón, was Mexican with indigenous and Spanish roots, devoutly Catholic, emotionally distant, and rooted in tradition. Frida inherited her father's introspection and artistic sensibility and her mother's unyielding strength. As a child, Frida was bold, curious, and a little wild. But her path to greatness began in pain. At 6 years old, she contracted polio, leaving her right leg thinner and weaker than the other. Children mocked her. She responded with sharp wit and a sharper will. Her father encouraged her to be physically active. She swam, boxed, wrestled, and mentally agile. They were close. Guillermo's camera often pointed at his daughter, capturing the spark behind her eyes. Frida dreamed of becoming a doctor. She was one of the few girls admitted to the prestigious National Preparatory School, where she studied science, philosophy, and politics. There she met a group of radical intellectuals, the Cachuchas, who embraced revolution, literature, and rebellion. Frida, with her unfiltered opinions and magnetic energy, fit right in. But fate had other plans. On September 17, 1925, Frida and her boyfriend, Alejandro Gómez Arias, boarded a wooden bus after school. Moments later, it collided with a streetcar. The impact was devastating. A metal handrail impaled Frida, entering her left hip and exiting through her pelvis. Her spine fractured in 3 places. Her leg was crushed. Her collarbone broke. Her foot dislocated. Her shoulder was torn apart. Her body was mangled. Her dreams of medicine vanished in that instant. During the long recovery that followed, she was confined to bed encased in full body casts and immobilized for months. But her mind kept moving. Her parents gave her a mirror, a special easel, and oil paints. She began to paint not landscapes or still lifes, but herself. Her first muse, her only consistent subject. In her own words, I paint myself because I am so often alone and because I am the subject I know best. These were not vain portraits. They were X-rays of her soul, brutal, honest, unflinching. She painted her pain, her broken body, her solitude. In one painting, she has split open her spine, a shattered column. In another, tears fall while her face remains stoic. She painted miscarriage, heartbreak, physical agony. But she did not paint to be pitied. She painted to survive. Her work, small in scale and personal in subject, was unlike anything the art world had seen. It mixed Catholic iconography with Aztec symbolism, medical illustration with surrealist dreamscapes. She turned trauma into aesthetic, pain into palette. In 1928, as her body slowly healed, Frida met Diego Rivera. He was Mexico's most famous painter, massive in size, reputation, and ego. She brought her paintings to him for critique. He was stunned. "You've got talent," he said, "and not just because I want to flatter you." They began a tempestuous relationship. They married in 1929. She was 22. He was 42. Her parents called it the marriage between an elephant and a dove. But Frida was no dove. Their relationship was electric, chaotic, and legendary. Diego supported Frida's work and introduced her to the art world, but he also betrayed her constantly, including an affair with her sister Cristina. Frida was devastated. In return, she had affairs of her own with both men and women. Their love was volcanic, their fights biblical. They divorced in 1939, only to remarry a year later. In this second marriage, Frida kept her own name, her own house, her own money. It was no longer a romance. It was a pact. Through it all, she kept painting. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to the United States, while he painted murals in San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. She hated it. America felt hollow, sterile, capitalist. Her paintings during this time, such as Henry Ford Hospital, show her bleeding on a hospital bed after a miscarriage, surrounded by symbolic objects tethered to her body by red veins. It is graphic, vulnerable, and profoundly human. Her art was always rooted in her body, broken but defiant. She painted herself as two Fridas, one in colonial dress with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous garb, heart intact, connected by a vein and holding hands. She painted her cultural identity, her grief, her rage, her politics. Her paintings were not decorative. They were declarations. She was a proud Mexican nationalist and a committed communist. She wore traditional Tijuana dresses, not just for style, but as political expression. Her unibrow and faint mustache, unapologetically visible, challenged Western beauty standards. She embraced her indigenous heritage. She resisted the gaze of colonial patriarchy. In 1939, she exhibited in Paris. Picasso praised her. The Louvre bought one of her works, the first by a 20th-century Mexican artist, to enter their collection. But Frida dismissed the Parisian art scene as this bunch of cuckoo lunatics and very stupid surrealists. "I don't paint dreams," she said. "I paint my own reality." By the 1940s, her health was deteriorating. Multiple surgeries, spinal fusions, infections. Her right leg was eventually amputated. She lived in constant pain. Sometimes she couldn't sit upright. She painted lying flat. She painted in bed, propped up by pillows. Her canvases became smaller, her colors darker. Still, she painted. In 1953, she had her first solo exhibition in Mexico. Doctors told her not to go. She arrived in an ambulance, carried on a stretcher, and installed in a bed in the center of the gallery. Guests drank tequila around her while she laughed and flirted and talked about art. Her presence was the exhibition. Her last paintings were still lifes of watermelons and wounded hearts. Her final diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Frida Kahlo died on July 13, 1954. Officially, it was a pulmonary embolism. Unofficially, many believe she willed herself to leave. She was 47. Her funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's grandest cultural venue. Her body was draped in the red flag of the Communist Party. Diego Rivera, the man who loved and wounded her, said her death was the greatest sorrow of his life. But death could not quiet Frida. For years, she was remembered as Diego's wife, but slowly, her own star rose. In the 1970s and 1980s, feminist artists and scholars rediscovered her work. Her paintings spoke to themes of identity, trauma, female experience, and resistance. They resonated across cultures. Frida became more than an artist. She became an icon. Today, her face is everywhere on T-shirts, murals, mugs, and museum walls. But her legacy is deeper than merchandise. She represents defiance, authenticity. She turned suffering into art, disability into expression, love into color, rage into symbolism. She lived openly as a bisexual woman at a time when it was dangerous to do so. She refused to be boxed in by gender, by nationality, by pain. She was complex, contradictory, raw, and radiant. She was Frida, not a saint, not a victim, a mirror for anyone who has endured pain and demanded to be seen anyway. She left behind not just paintings, but a blueprint for living out loud, breaking rules, and making art out of agony. Frida Kahlo didn't ask for immortality. She painted her truth, and the world couldn't look away.